Adrian Whitmore stood frozen at his bedroom window, watching the new pool maintenance worker move through the morning sunlight like he owned the estate. 23 years old, virgin, heir to a billion-dollar pharmaceutical empire, and completely, devastatingly captivated by a man whose name he didn't even know yet. The worker was black, probably late 20s, with shoulders that strained against his company polo and hands that moved with confident precision as he tested the water chemistry. Adrian had watched him for 3 weeks now, always from this same window, always at exactly 9 a.m. when his father was locked in conference calls and couldn't see his son's pathetic obsession. Before we dive in, comment where in the world you are watching from, and don't forget to click subscribe. Adrian had never wanted anyone the way he wanted this stranger, had never felt his body respond with such immediate, overwhelming hunger. It terrified him, this desire, because it confirmed everything his father had spent years trying to suppress, deny, reshape into something acceptable for a Whitmore heir. "You'll marry Catherine Ashford," his father had announced 6 months ago. "The merger benefits both families, and you'll produce heirs. Whatever confusion you're experiencing is temporary. All young men go through phases." But this wasn't a phase. Adrian knew it bone deep, soul certain. He was gay, had always been gay, and he was running out of time to figure out who he actually was before his father's expectations crushed him completely. The pool worker looked up suddenly, and their eyes met across the expanse of manicured lawn. Adrian should have stepped back, should have pretended he hadn't been staring, but he was paralyzed by the intensity in that gaze. Dark brown eyes that seemed to see straight through the window, through the walls, through every careful lie Adrian had built around himself. The worker smiled. Not friendly, not polite. Something knowing and dangerous that made Adrian's breath catch and his untouched body respond in ways that left him aching and ashamed and desperately wanting more. Then the moment broke. The worker returned to his equipment, and Adrian stumbled away from the window, heart hammering, hands shaking, completely undone by a single look from a man he'd never spoken to. He was in so much trouble. Marcus Webb had noticed the boy in the window his first day on the job. Hard not to when those blue eyes tracked his every movement with an intensity that was almost physical. The Whitmore kid, Adrian, according to the estate manager, watched him like he was both terrified and fascinated, like Marcus was some kind of dangerous animal he couldn't look away from. Marcus knew that look. He'd seen it before on closeted rich kids who'd spent their whole lives pretending, performing, hiding who they really were until the pressure built so high they were ready to explode. Adrian Whitmore was wound tight enough to snap, and Marcus could, practically feel the kid's desperation from 50 yards away. He shouldn't engage. The contract with Whitmore's estate management company was lucrative, and Marcus needed this job to fund his younger sister's college tuition. Getting involved with the billionaire's obviously repressed son was a recipe for disaster on every possible level. But there was something about the way Adrian looked at him. Something raw and honest and achingly vulnerable beneath all that carefully maintained distance. Like he was drowning, and Marcus was the only person who could see him going under. And Marcus, despite knowing better, despite every ethical boundary he should respect, found himself wanting to exploit that vulnerability, found himself thinking about what it would be like to have power over someone like Adrian Whitmore, to make the untouchable heir beg. Marcus had his own history with power and powerlessness. At 19, he'd been in a relationship with an older man who'd used similar tactics, threats, manipulation, coercion disguised as care. Marcus had eventually escaped, but the experience had left scars, deep ones, the kind that sometimes made him want to be the one holding power instead of having it held over him. He recognized the sickness in that impulse, recognized that wanting to hurt someone the way he'd been hurt was wrong, but recognition didn't stop the desire, didn't prevent him from seeing Adrian's vulnerability and thinking, I could use this, I could have him. Marcus finished checking the pool filters and made a calculated decision. He pulled out his phone and typed a message to the estate manager. Need to discuss some issues with the pool heater. Will require access to the mechanical room. Should I coordinate with the main house? The response came quickly. Use the west entrance. Mr. Whitmore Sr. is in meetings all morning. Adrian can let you in if needed. Perfect. Marcus knocked on the west entrance door and waited, counting his own heartbeats, planning his approach. When Adrian opened the door, Marcus could see the want written all over his face, the dilated pupils, the flush creeping up his neck, the way his breath caught when their eyes met. This was going to be easy. Too easy. And some part of Marcus, the part that still remembered being 19 and terrified, whispered that he should walk away, should leave this kid alone, should be better than the man who'd hurt him. But Marcus ignored that voice, because Adrian Whitmore represented everything Marcus had never been allowed to have: wealth, privilege, opportunity. And if Marcus couldn't have those things, he could at least have Adrian, could take something from the golden boy who'd never struggled, never suffered, never understood what it meant to be powerless. Adrian's voice came out higher than he'd probably intended. He cleared his throat, tried again. The pool heater? Having some issues with the mechanical systems, Marcus said smoothly, keeping his tone. Professional even as he cataloged every sign of Adrian's desire. Need to check the equipment room. Won't take long. Right, yes, of course. Adrian stepped back too quickly, nearly tripping over his own feet. It's this way. I'll show you. As Adrian led him through the mansion's hallways, Marcus observed everything with the eye of someone who'd grown up with nothing. The original art on the walls probably cost more than Marcus's mother had earned in her entire lifetime. The marble floors were imported Italian, if he wasn't mistaken. The furniture was the kind you saw in magazines, not stores. Adrian had grown up surrounded by all this wealth, this comfort, this security. He'd never known what it was like to choose between paying rent and buying food. Never understood the panic of a medical bill you couldn't afford. Never experienced the grinding humiliation of poverty. And now, he was going to learn a different kind of humiliation. Marcus would make sure of it. They reached the mechanical room, and once the door closed behind them, Marcus made his move. Adrian. He said the name deliberately, claiming intimacy without permission. We need to talk about what's been happening between us. Adrian's eyes went wide. There's nothing. Don't lie to me, Marcus said, his voice dropping lower, more commanding. I've seen you watching me, every morning from your bedroom window. I know what you want. Adrian's face went scarlet. It's okay, Marcus said, taking a step closer. Close enough that Adrian had to tilt his head back to maintain eye contact. I'm not judging you, but Adrian, I think we need to be honest about your situation. You're gay. You're engaged to a woman you don't want. Your father is planning your entire future, and none of it includes who you actually are. Adrian's breath came faster. I pay attention, Marcus said. I listen, I watch. And I know you're trapped, desperate, looking for any way out. He paused, letting the words sink in. That makes you vulnerable. And vulnerability can be dangerous if the wrong person notices it. What do you want? Adrian whispered. Marcus smiled, slow and predatory. Right now. I want you to understand that I could make your life very complicated. One conversation with your father about what I've observed, his son's morning habits, where those eyes wander, the way you look at men versus women, and everything you're trying to hide comes crashing down. Adrian went pale. You wouldn't. I could, Marcus corrected. The question is whether you give me a reason not to. That's blackmail, Adrian said, his voice shaking. That's reality, Marcus countered. You want me, I want you, and you're going to give me what I want. Because the alternative is your father learning the truth before you're ready to tell him. Adrian looked like he might cry, or run, or both. Marcus pressed his advantage, even as some distant part of him screamed that this was wrong, that he was becoming exactly what he'd once escaped from. Here's what's going to happen, Marcus said, his voice dropping to something intimate and threatening all at once. Tonight, midnight, the guest house at the edge of your property. You're going to meet me there, and you're going to do exactly what I tell you to do. I can't, Adrian started. You will, Marcus interrupted, because if you don't show up, your father gets a very detailed phone call tomorrow morning. And Adrian? He reached out and traced one finger along Adrian's jawline, feeling him tremble under the touch. When you come to me tonight, you'll do everything I ask. Every single thing. No hesitation, no refusal. You understand? Please, Adrian whispered. Don't make me. I'm not making you do anything, Marcus said with false gentleness. I'm giving you a choice. You can choose to meet me tonight and keep your secret safe. Or you can choose not to and face the consequences. Simple as that. He stepped back, creating distance that felt like both relief and loss for Adrian. Midnight. Don't be late. And Adrian, if you disappoint me, if you can't follow simple instructions, then we're going to have problems. Clear? Adrian nodded mutely, looking like he might be sick. Good boy, Marcus said, the praise laced with possession. I'll see you tonight. Adrian spent the rest of the day in a state of barely controlled panic. He'd been cornered, trapped, coerced into something he wasn't ready for by someone who'd weaponized his own desire against him. He should refuse, should tell Marcus to go to hell, should face whatever consequences came from his father learning the truth. But he was 23 years old, and he'd never been brave. Had spent his entire life avoiding confrontation, performing obedience, doing whatever it took to keep the peace. His father had trained that response into him from childhood. Don't make waves, don't cause problems, don't embarrass the family. And now that same trained compliance was leading him toward the guest house at 11:55 p.m., unable to find the courage to say no, even when everything in him screamed that this was wrong. The walk across the dark estate felt endless. Adrian's hands shook so badly he had to shove them in his pockets. His heart hammered against his ribs. His mind kept replaying Marcus's threat. One conversation with your father. His father, who'd already made it clear that being gay was unacceptable, who'd arranged Adrian's entire future around heterosexual marriage and producing heirs, who'd dismissed Adrian's one tentative attempt at coming out with, "That's not who you are. That's not who a Whitmore can be." If his father found out now, before Adrian had any independence or resources, he'd be destroyed, cut off, disowned, cast out with nothing. At least if Adrian went to Marcus tonight, he could buy himself time. Time to graduate. Time to establish himself. Time to prepare for the inevitable. Confrontation. That's what he told himself as he reached the guest house door. This was strategic. This was survival. This had nothing to do with the shameful part of him that wanted Marcus despite the coercion, that craved the touch he'd been denying himself for years, that was desperate enough to accept even this twisted version of intimacy. The door was unlocked. Adrian stepped inside and found Marcus already there, lounging on the leather couch like he owned it. He'd changed into jeans and a t-shirt that clung to his muscular frame, and when he saw Adrian, his smile was pure predator who'd caught his prey. "You came," Marcus said with satisfaction. "I wasn't completely sure you would." "Did I have a choice?" Adrian asked bitterly. "There's always a choice," Marcus replied, standing and crossing toward him with deliberate slowness. "You could have stayed in your room tonight, could have faced your father's anger tomorrow, but you didn't. You chose this." "You threatened me," Adrian said. "I gave you options," Marcus corrected. "And you chose the option where you get what you've been fantasizing about for weeks, where someone finally touches you the way you've been dying to be touched. That's not force, Adrian. That's giving you what you want." "I don't want it like this," Adrian whispered. "Your body says differently," Marcus said, his eyes dropping to the visible evidence of Adrian's arousal that betrayed him despite everything. "You're already responding to me just from being in the same room. You want this. You just wish you didn't have to admit it." Adrian felt tears burn behind his eyes. Shame and desire and fear all tangled together until he couldn't separate them. His body was betraying him, responding to Marcus's proximity, even as his mind screamed danger. Marcus reached out and cupped Adrian's face, forcing him to maintain eye contact. "Here's how tonight's going to work. You're going to do exactly what I tell you. You're going to learn what your body is capable of, and you're going to thank me for teaching you." "And if I refuse?" Adrian asked, though his voice shook with the certainty that he couldn't refuse. Marcus's smile sharpened, and there was something almost sad in his eyes for just a moment before it vanished. "Then you'll find out just how detailed that conversation with your father can be. I've been watching you for weeks, Adrian. I know what time you go to bed, what you wear, how you look at me when you think no one's paying attention, how you adjust yourself when you turn away from the window. I could paint quite the picture. He traced his thumb across Adrian's bottom lip, the gesture possessive and claiming. Now, are you going to cooperate, or do we need to have that difficult conversation tomorrow? Adrian felt something break inside him. Resistance crumbling under the weight of fear and desperate need and years of trained obedience. I'll cooperate. Good, Marcus said, and then his voice dropped to something darker, more intimate. Then we start with something simple. Get on your knees. Adrian's eyes went wide. What? On your knees, Marcus repeated, his voice harder now, brooking no argument. I'm going to teach you exactly how to please me. And Adrian, you're going to learn quickly, because I have very specific expectations. Adrian's legs felt weak as he slowly sank to his knees on the expensive carpet. This was happening. This was really happening. He was being coerced into sexual acts by a man who held his deepest secret like a weapon. And some twisted part of him was still aroused, still wanting, even knowing how wrong this was. Marcus looked down at him with dark satisfaction, and Adrian saw something flicker across his face, triumph mixed with something that might have been self-loathing, but it was gone too quickly to process. That's better, Marcus said, his voice rough. Now, I'm going to teach you something your sheltered little life has never exposed you to, and you're going to pay attention, because if you disappoint me, there will be consequences. He reached for his belt, and Adrian felt panic rise in his throat, even as shameful anticipation coiled in his belly. I've never. I know, Marcus said, and for just a moment his voice softened. That's what makes this. He stopped himself, jaw tightening. Then the hardness returned. That's why you need to learn. No bad habits to break, just pure, untouched innocence that I get to shape. Please, Adrian whispered, though he didn't know if he was begging Marcus to stop or to continue. His body ached with want, even as his mind screamed that this was violation. The two impulses warred inside him, tearing him apart. Please what? Marcus prompted, his hands pausing on his belt. Please show you what you've been missing. Please teach you how good submission can feel. Please make you into someone who knows how to satisfy a man. Adrian couldn't answer, could only kneel there, trembling, torn between desire and terror, while Marcus looked down at him with an expression that held triumph and something darker, something that looked almost like regret. That's what I thought, Marcus said finally. Now open your mouth. And Adrian, his voice dropped to something dangerous and explicit. You're going to swallow everything I give you, or I'll tell your dad exactly what kind of son he's been trying to cure. Exactly what you do on your knees. Exactly how desperate you were for this. Understand? The words hit Adrian like a physical blow. Swallow it or I'll tell your dad. The ultimatum was explicit, brutal, designed to humiliate and control. This wasn't about teaching or pleasure or even desire. This was about power, about forcing Adrian to degrade himself as payment for silence. I understand, Adrian whispered, hating himself for giving in, for being too weak to fight back, for wanting this even under these impossible circumstances, for his body's betrayal in responding to someone who was abusing him. Good boy, Marcus said again, and then his hands were in Adrian's hair, guiding him forward with a gentleness that belied the coercion, teaching him through threat what should have been learned through trust and mutual desire. What followed was overwhelming in ways Adrian's inexperienced mind couldn't fully process. Marcus was demanding but instructive, his voice alternating between commands and praise that made Adrian's head spin. That's it, just like that. You're doing so well. Take more. Good. Breathe through your nose. Perfect. The praise shouldn't have felt good considering the circumstances, but it did. Adrian's starved ego, desperate for approval he'd never received from his father, soaked up Marcus's words, even as the rational part of his mind screamed that this was manipulation. When Marcus finally reached his peak, his hands tightened in Adrian's hair, holding him in place. Swallow it, he commanded, his voice rough. All of it. Show me you can follow instructions. Adrian did as he was told, choking slightly, tears streaming down his face from the physical discomfort and emotional devastation. When Marcus finally released him, Adrian pulled back, gasping, feeling thoroughly used, and somehow still aching for more touch, more connection, more of the twisted intimacy that was the only kind he'd ever experienced. Marcus pulled him up from his knees and kissed him deeply, tasting himself on Adrian's lips in a gesture that felt both claiming and strangely tender. "You did so well," he murmured against Adrian's mouth. "Better than I expected for your first time. See? You needed this. Needed someone to push you past your fear and show you what you're capable of." Adrian was shaking, unable to speak, his mind reeling from what had just happened. Marcus guided him to the couch, and over the next hours, continued his education, touching Adrian with skilled hands, drawing responses from his virgin body that left him gasping and ashamed and desperate for more. Marcus taught him what arousal felt like when stoked by experienced hands, showed him pleasure he'd never imagined, brought him to completion multiple times while murmuring praise and possession. "Mine. You're mine now. No one else will ever touch you like this. No one else will ever make you feel this good." And through it all, the threat hung unspoken but ever present. "This continues, or your father finds out." When Adrian finally stumbled back to the main house as dawn was breaking, he felt hollowed out, used, broken in ways he didn't have words for. His body hummed with the memory of pleasure, but his mind understood that what had happened was assault dressed up as seduction. But his secret was still safe, for now. And in his twisted logic shaped by years of his father's control, that made the trade worthwhile. The pattern continued for 3 weeks. Marcus would text Adrian with instructions, when to meet him, what to wear, what would be expected. The messages were explicit, leaving no room for misunderstanding. "Tonight, 11 p.m., wear something easy to remove. Tomorrow, guest house, be ready to learn something new. Friday, midnight, I have plans for you." And Adrian would go, unable to refuse, unable to find the courage to face the alternative. Each encounter followed a similar pattern. Marcus would start with the threat, reminding Adrian of what hung in the balance, then proceed to take what he wanted, while simultaneously teaching Adrian to respond, to participate, to derive pleasure from his own violation. The cognitive dissonance was destroying Adrian. His body craved Marcus's touch, responded eagerly to his skilled hands and demanding mouth. But his mind knew this was wrong. That consent given under threat wasn't consent at all. That he was being systematically abused by someone who targeted his vulnerability. Marcus was careful, strategic. He never left marks where Adrian's father might see them. Never pushed hard enough to make Adrian rebel. Always balanced the coercion with enough genuine pleasure that Adrian's confused mind could pretend this was wanted, chosen, desired. "You're getting better at this," Marcus would say, running his hands through Adrian's hair after particularly degrading acts. "Learning to take what I give you without fighting. That's growth, Adrian. You should be proud." But Adrian wasn't proud. He was ashamed and confused and so tangled up in trauma bonding that he'd started to crave Marcus's touch, even as he hated the circumstances that brought them together. He found himself watching the clock until their next meeting, his body anticipating pleasure, even as his mind dreaded more violation. The worst part was the intimacy that grew between them, despite the coercion. Marcus would sometimes hold Adrian afterward, stroking his back while Adrian trembled, through the aftermath of pleasure mixed with shame. Would sometimes ask him questions about his life, his dreams, his fears, as if they were lovers rather than victim and abuser. "Why do you let him control you like this?" Marcus asked one night, his voice uncharacteristically soft. They were lying on the guest house bed, Adrian's head on Marcus's chest, both of them naked and cooling in the aftermath. "My father?" Adrian asked. "Yeah. Why do you let him dictate your entire life?" Adrian laughed bitterly. "You're asking me that, while you're doing the exact same thing?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "That's fair," he finally said. "But Adrian, what I'm doing, this is temporary. I'll get tired of this eventually, or you'll find the courage to tell me to go to hell. But your father, that's your whole life. That's forever unless you change it." "I don't know how to change it," Adrian admitted. "I don't know how to be anything except what he expects." "Then you'll suffocate," Marcus said, and there was something almost like genuine concern in his voice. "You'll marry that woman, have kids you don't want, live a lie for decades until you can't remember who you really are. Is that what you want?" "Of course not," Adrian said. But what's the alternative? Get cut off, lose everything, start over with nothing? At least it would be yours, Marcus said. At least you'd be free. The irony of receiving life advice from his abuser wasn't lost on Adrian, but the words burrowed into his mind anyway, planting seeds that would eventually grow into something stronger than fear. It was Catherine who finally noticed something was wrong. She cornered Adrian after a charity luncheon where he'd been particularly distracted, barely able to focus on conversation or remember the names of people he'd known for years. "Adrian, you look terrible," she said bluntly once they were alone. "What's going on with you?" Adrian tried to deflect, to perform the role of perfectly composed heir. But Catherine had known him since childhood, and she saw through the mask. "Is it the engagement?" she pressed. "Because Adrian, if you're having doubts, we should talk about it. This doesn't have to be a prison sentence for either of us." And something in her genuine concern, in the opening she was offering him, broke through the fog Adrian had been living in. He started crying, right there in the parking lot, and couldn't stop. Years of suppressed emotion came pouring out in ugly, gasping sobs that shook his entire body. Catherine got him into her car and drove to a quiet park where no one would see the heir to the Whitmore fortune falling apart. And once Adrian started talking, everything came pouring out. The watching, the confrontation, the blackmail, the ongoing coercion, the way Marcus held his secret like a knife to his throat, the twisted intimacy that had developed, the confusion between pleasure and violation. Catherine listened without interrupting, her expression growing more horrified with each detail. When Adrian finally ran out of words, she sat in stunned silence for a moment before speaking. "Adrian," she finally said, her voice shaking with suppressed rage, "that's rape. What he's doing to you, that's sexual assault. Ongoing, systematic sexual assault. You need to understand that. But Adrian struggled for words, his throat tight. "I wanted him. Before all this started, I wanted him so badly I couldn't think straight. And my body still responds to him. I still get aroused when he touches me, still reach completion, still feel pleasure. How can it be assault if part of me wants it? Because wanting someone and consenting to be with them are completely different things," Catherine said firmly, her hands gripping the steering wheel so hard her knuckles went white. "He's threatening to out you if you don't comply. He's using your most vulnerable secret as a weapon. That's coercion, Adrian. That's force. It doesn't matter what your body does. You're not there by choice. You're there because you're afraid of what he'll do if you refuse." The words landed like stones in Adrian's chest. He'd been trying so hard not to think of it that way, trying to convince himself that it was complicated, that there were gray areas, that maybe he was somehow complicit because his body responded, because some part of him enjoyed the physical sensations even while his mind screamed violation. "I don't know how to stop it," Adrian admitted, his voice breaking. "I don't know how to say no when he has so much power over me, when the alternative is losing everything." "Then we take that power away," Catherine said decisively. "We get ahead of this. Adrian, I'm going to tell you something I've never told anyone. I'm a lesbian." Adrian's eyes widened. "What?" "I'm a lesbian," Catherine repeated, turning to face him fully. "I've been in love with my college roommate for 3 years. This engagement, it's our father's dream, not ours. I'm just as trapped as you are, just in a different way." They stared at each other, two people trapped in the same impossible situation, both hiding the same fundamental truth about themselves. "So what do we do?" Adrian asked. "We come out," Catherine said. "Together. We end this engagement publicly, come out as gay and lesbian, support each other through the fallout. We take away Marcus's leverage by exposing the secret ourselves, on our own terms." "My father will destroy me," Adrian whispered. "Maybe," Catherine agreed. "Probably. But Adrian, staying silent means letting Marcus continue assaulting you. And I can't watch that happen. You deserve so much better than this. We both do." They talked for hours, Catherine gradually convincing Adrian that he needed to report what was happening, that he needed to tell someone in authority who could help him escape Marcus's control. It wouldn't be easy. It would require coming out to his father, facing potential disownment, rebuilding his entire life. But the alternative, continuing to be raped multiple times a week by someone who'd weaponized his vulnerability, was no longer bearable. 2 days later, with Catherine beside him for support and her girlfriend Emma waiting in the car for moral support, Adrian walked into a police station with shaking hands and a determination he didn't know he possessed. The intake officer was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes who listened to Adrian's stammered explanation with increasing concern before calling for a detective who specialized in sexual assault cases. Detective Sarah Martinez was in her 40s, with short dark hair and an expression that managed to be both compassionate and professionally neutral. She led Adrian and Catherine to a private interview room and sat across from them with a notepad. "Take your time," she said gently. "Start from the beginning and tell me everything." And Adrian did. He told her about watching Marcus from his window, about the confrontation in the mechanical room, about Marcus's explicit threats to out him if he didn't comply, about the first night in the Gueston house when Marcus had forced him to his knees and given him that brutal ultimatum: "Swallow it or I'll tell your dad." He showed her the text messages Marcus had sent with explicit instructions and veiled threats. He documented every encounter he could remember, every act he'd been coerced into performing, every threat Marcus had used to maintain control. By the time he finished, Adrian was crying again, but these were different tears. Not shame, but relief. Finally, someone with authority was listening, someone who could help. Detective Martinez reviewed the text messages on Adrian's phone, photographing each one as evidence. Her expression grew grimmer with each screenshot. "Mr. Whitmore," she said, when she'd finished documenting everything, "what you're describing is multiple counts of felony sexual assault through coercion and blackmail. The threats to expose your sexuality unless you complied with sexual demands, that constitutes force under the law. The fact that this happened repeatedly over several weeks makes it even more serious." "But Adrian's voice cracked. "I went to him willingly each time. I didn't physically fight back. My body responded with arousal. How is that assault?" "Because you went under duress," Detective Martinez explained patiently. "You went because you were afraid of what would happen if you didn't. That's not consent, Adrian. Consent requires the freedom to say no without fear of consequences. You didn't have that freedom." She leaned forward, her expression intense. "I need you to understand something very clearly. What happened to you was not your fault. Your body's physical responses don't negate the coercion. The fact that you experienced pleasure at times doesn't mean you wanted this. Arousal is a physiological response that can occur even during assault. It doesn't indicate consent or desire." Adrian felt something loosen in his chest, years of self-blame and confusion beginning to unravel. "So it really was rape?" "Yes," Detective Martinez said firmly. "It was rape, multiple instances of rape, and we're going to do everything we can to hold your abuser accountable." She explained the next steps: forensic interviews, evidence collection, potentially recording future communications with Marcus if Adrian felt safe doing so. But then she delivered the news Adrian had been dreading. "I need to prepare you for something difficult," she said. "If we move forward with prosecution, which I strongly recommend we do, this will become public. Sexual assault trials are technically confidential, but in reality, especially with a high-profile victim like yourself, details leak. The fact that you're gay, the nature of the coercion, potentially explicit details about the assaults, all of that will likely become public knowledge." "My father will find out," Adrian said numbly. "Yes," Detective Martinez confirmed. "He will, and I'm sorry for that. I know it's not the way you wanted to come out. But Adrian, this man is dangerous. He targeted you specifically because of your vulnerability. If we don't stop him, he'll find another victim, someone else who's closeted and desperate and easy to exploit." Adrian looked at Catherine, who squeezed his hand encouragingly. Then he thought about Marcus finding another scared kid to victimize, using the same tactics, destroying someone else the way he'd almost destroyed Adrian. "I want to do it," Adrian said, his voice gaining strength. "I want to press charges. I want him prosecuted. And if that means coming out publicly, if it means my father learning the truth this way." He took a shaky breath. Then that's what happens. I'm done letting fear control me. Detective Martinez smiled with genuine pride. That takes tremendous courage, Adrian. I want you to know that. Over the next few days, the investigation moved quickly. Detective Martinez was thorough, documenting everything, building an airtight case. The text messages alone were damning, explicit sexual demands coupled with reminders of what Marcus could reveal if Adrian refused. Adrian gave a formal videotaped statement, recounting each assault in detail. It was brutal, humiliating, forcing him to relive trauma he'd been trying to suppress. But with Catherine beside him and Detective Martinez treating him with respect and compassion, he made it through. On day 5 of the investigation, Marcus was arrested at his apartment. The police executed a search warrant, seizing his phone and computer, finding even more incriminating evidence. Photos Marcus had taken of Adrian during some of their encounters without his knowledge, saved text conversations, searches Marcus had done about coercion and blackmail that suggested premeditation. The arrest made local news immediately. Local man arrested for sexual assault of billionaire heir. Within hours, reporters had connected the dots. Whitmore heir, allegedly assaulted by pool maintenance worker, became Adrian Whitmore reports assault by male worker, coercion alleged. By evening, everyone knew. Everyone. Adrian's phone exploded with messages. From friends, from distant relatives, from business associates, from reporters seeking comment. He turned it off and sat in Catherine's apartment, where he'd been staying since filing the report, staring at nothing, trying to process that his deepest secret was now public knowledge. His father called Catherine's landline at 8 p.m. Catherine answered, listened for a moment, then looked at Adrian with sympathy before handing him the phone. "Hello, Father," Adrian said, his voice steadier than he expected. "What have you done?" His father's voice was cold with rage. "Do you have any idea what you've done to this family's reputation? The scandal you've created?" "I reported being sexually assaulted," Adrian said, "multiple times, over 3 weeks, by someone who blackmailed me using my sexuality as leverage." "Your sexuality?" His father spat the words like poison. "This perverted lifestyle you've been hiding. Did you think I wouldn't find out eventually?" "I thought you'd find out when I was ready to tell you," Adrian said. "But my abuser took that choice away from me, just like he took away every other choice." "You're weak," his father said. "You should have handled this privately. Instead, you've dragged our family name through the mud with these sordid details." Something in Adrian snapped. Years of trying to please this man, of bending himself into shapes that hurt, of accepting blame for things that weren't his fault. All of it crystallized into clarity. "No," Adrian said firmly. "I'm not weak. I'm strong enough to speak up. Strong enough to refuse to be victimized in silence. Strong enough to prioritize justice over reputation. And if you can't see that, if all you care about is how this affects the Whitmore name, then I don't need you in my life." His father's voice went dangerously quiet. "Then you're cut off. Completely. No trust fund, no position in the company, no support of any kind. As of this moment, I don't have a son." "Good," Adrian said, surprised by how much he meant it. "Then we're both free. You're free from the disappointment of having a gay son, and I'm free from trying to be someone I'm not for a man who never actually loved me." He hung up before his father could respond. Catherine pulled him into a hug and Adrian cried, but these weren't tears of devastation. They were tears of release, of freedom, of finally standing up for himself. "I'm proud of you," Catherine whispered. "That took more courage than anything I've ever seen." "I just told my father to go to hell," Adrian said with a slightly hysterical laugh. "I have no money, no job prospects, and I'm about to be nationally known as the gay heir who got sexually assaulted by the pool boy. My life is a disaster." "Your life is about to begin," Catherine corrected. "Really begin, on your own terms. And Adrian, you're not alone. Emma and I have already set up the guest room for you. You'll stay with us until you get on your feet, and I spoke to my grandmother. She's willing to help both of us financially until we're established. We're doing this together." The trial happened 8 months later, giving Adrian time to process trauma, build a support system, and prepare himself for what was coming. In those months, he started intensive therapy with a counselor who specialized in sexual trauma. The work was painful, confronting the ways his father's control had primed him to accept Marcus's manipulation, understanding how his desperate need for connection had made him vulnerable, learning to separate his genuine attraction from the trauma bonding. He and Catherine officially ended their engagement with a joint press conference where they came out publicly and explained that their relationship had been arranged by their families against their wishes. The response was mixed, some people supportive, others judgmental. But it didn't matter. They had each other and Emma, and a growing circle of friends from the LGBT community. Adrian got a job at a photography studio, starting at the bottom, learning the craft he'd always loved but never pursued. He got his own small apartment, modest compared to his childhood mansion, but truly his. He built a life that actually belonged to him, and through it all, he prepared for trial. Marcus's defense attorney tried every tactic, argued that Adrian had gone willingly to their encounters, that his text messages agreeing to meet proved consent, that Adrian's physical arousal indicated desire rather than coercion. But the prosecution, led by a fierce district attorney named Rebecca Chen, systematically dismantled each argument. She brought in expert witnesses who testified about trauma bonding, about how arousal can occur during assault, about the psychological impact of blackmail. She walked the jury through Marcus's text messages, highlighting the threats. "Don't keep me waiting, or we'll have that conversation you've been dreading. Remember what happens if you disappoint me. I could tell him everything, Adrian, every detail. Is that what you want?" And most damning of all, recovered from Marcus's phone. Easy prey, rich, closeted, desperate, perfect target. Adrian had to testify, spending 2 brutal days on the stand recounting every assault in detail. Marcus's defense attorney was aggressive, trying to paint Adrian as a willing participant, suggesting he'd seduced Marcus, implying he'd cried rape only after feeling guilty. But Adrian held firm. He'd practiced with the prosecutors, prepared for every possible attack. And when the defense attorney asked, "Isn't it true that you experienced orgasms during these encounters?" Adrian looked directly at the jury and said, "Yes. My body responded physically, because that's what bodies do. But I was there under threat. Every time I went to that guest house, I went because I was afraid of what would happen if I didn't. That's not consent. That's survival." The courtroom was silent. When Rebecca Chen did her closing argument, she spoke directly to the core of the case. The defense wants you to believe that because Adrian Whitmore's body responded, because he experienced physical pleasure, that he consented to these encounters. But let me ask you something. If someone holds a gun to your head and demands your wallet, and your body produces adrenaline, a physiological response, does that mean you wanted to be robbed? If someone coerces you into signing a contract by threatening to destroy your career, and your hand is steady while signing, a physical action, does that mean you willingly entered that contract? Adrian Whitmore's body responding to stimulation doesn't indicate consent any more than those examples do. What indicates lack of consent are the threats, the explicit blackmail, the power imbalance, the defendant's own words, "Swallow it or I'll tell your dad." That's not seduction, ladies and gentlemen. That's rape. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours, guilty on all counts of sexual assault through coercion. When the verdict was read, Adrian felt something inside him finally settle. Justice, validation, the confirmation that what had been done to him was wrong, that he hadn't imagined the violation, that his experience mattered. Marcus was sentenced to 6 years in prison with mandatory therapy for sex offenders. As he was led away, he looked back at Adrian once. Their eyes met, and Adrian saw something in Marcus's expression. Regret, maybe, or just the recognition of consequences finally catching up. Adrian felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not vindication, not even anger. Just closure. Outside the courthouse, Adrian gave a brief statement to the press, Catherine and Emma flanking him on either side. No one should have to choose between their safety and their truth. No one should be coerced into sexual acts through threats and manipulation. I'm speaking up because I want other survivors to know that it's not your fault, that you deserve justice, and that coming forward, as terrifying as it is, can lead to freedom. To anyone experiencing sexual coercion right now, you deserve better. You deserve to be treated with respect, and there are people who will believe you and help you if you speak up. Thank you." The statement went viral within hours. Adrian became, somewhat reluctantly, a spokesperson for survivors of sexual coercion and blackmail. Organizations reached out asking him to share his story. Other survivors contacted him to say his testimony had helped them recognize their own abuse and report it. Adrian used his platform carefully, always emphasizing that survival looks different for everyone, that reporting isn't always safe or possible, that healing is a journey with no set timeline. 2 years after Marcus's conviction, Adrian had his first gallery showing. He'd continued working at the photography studio while building his own portfolio on the side. Black and white photographs exploring themes of captivity, coercion, and liberation. The show was titled After the Threat, and it chronicled his journey from victim to survivor through stark, powerful images. Photographs of locked doors and open windows, of chains broken and birds in flight, of shadows and light, captivity and freedom. The opening night was packed with people, friends, supporters, fellow survivors, art critics, even some reporters who'd covered his trial. Catherine and Emma came, dressed to the nines and beaming with pride. The detective who'd handled his case came, along with the prosecutor, both of them visibly moved by seeing him thriving. Adrian stood among his photographs, feeling something he hadn't felt in years, genuine pride in who he'd become and what he'd survived. A young man approached him hesitantly, maybe 20, with nervous eyes. "Mr. Whitmore, I just wanted to thank you. Your testimony, reading about your case, it helped me realize I wasn't alone, that what happened to me wasn't my fault. I reported my assault because of you." Adrian felt tears prick his eyes. This was why it had all been worth it. Every painful moment of the trial, every invasive question, every humiliating detail revealed, if his suffering could help even one person recognize their own abuse and seek help, it mattered. "I'm so proud of you," Adrian said, shaking the young man's hand. "How are you doing?" "Better," the young man said. "It's hard, but I'm in therapy, and I have support, and I'm alive. I'm free, because of survivors like you who spoke up first." They talked for a while, and Adrian learned that the young man, Tyler, had been coerced by a professor who'd threatened to fail him if he didn't comply. Tyler had reported after reading about Adrian's case and realizing that his situation also constituted assault. "Your professor is facing charges?" Adrian asked. "Yeah, trial's next month. I'm terrified, but..." Tyler gestured at Adrian's photographs. "Seeing this, seeing you thriving, it helps. It reminds me that there's life after trauma." "There absolutely is," Adrian assured him. "It takes work and support and time. But Tyler, you can heal from this. You can build a life that's authentically yours. I promise." After Tyler left, Adrian stood quietly among his work, reflecting on how far he'd come. From the terrified, closeted heir watching Marcus from his window, to the survivor who'd found the courage to reclaim his life and his power and use his experience to help others. That night, back in his apartment, small but genuinely his, Adrian wrote in the journal his therapist had encouraged him to keep. "Today, I realized something important. My story isn't defined by what Marcus did to me. It's defined by what I chose to do in response. He tried to break me through coercion, to reduce me to someone whose only value was compliance. But I refused that narrative. I spoke up. I fought back. I turned my trauma into advocacy." The title he tried to give my story was "Swallow It or I'll Tell Your Dad." The ultimate humiliation, the ultimate control, a threat designed to degrade and silence me. But the title I chose for my story is After the Threat, because I refused to let that moment of coercion define me. I built a life after the threat, beyond the trauma, into freedom. Marcus tried to make me powerless, but I found power in speaking truth, in refusing silence, in helping others recognize their own worth. That's my legacy. Not the assault, not the violation, but the courage to speak up and the commitment to helping others find that same courage. I am Adrian Whitmore. I am a survivor of sexual coercion, but I am so much more than that. I am an artist. I am an advocate. I am someone who transformed pain into purpose, and I am free. 3 years after the trial, Adrian met someone. Daniel was a trauma therapist who specialized in working with survivors of sexual assault and they met at a conference where Adrian was speaking about his experience. Daniel was handsome in a gentle way, warm brown eyes, an easy smile, the kind of calm presence that came from someone who'd done their own healing work. He approached Adrian after the panel, introducing himself and thanking Adrian for his courage in speaking publicly. "Your story has helped several of my clients recognize their own experiences as assault," Daniel said. "That's powerful work you're doing." They exchanged contact information, ostensibly for professional collaboration, but over the following weeks, texts became phone calls, and phone calls became coffee dates, and coffee dates became dinner. Adrian was cautious. His therapist had warned him that dating after sexual trauma could be complicated, that he needed to move slowly and pay attention to his own comfort levels. But with Daniel, everything felt different. Daniel understood trauma in ways others couldn't. He never pushed, never assumed, never made Adrian feel pressured. Every step forward in their relationship was preceded by explicit conversation about boundaries and consent. "I want to make sure you always feel safe with me," Daniel said after their third date. "If anything I do reminds you of what happened with Marcus, if you ever feel uncomfortable or pressured, you tell me immediately. Your comfort and autonomy matter more than anything else." "Thank you," Adrian said, feeling tears prick his eyes at being treated with such care. "That means everything to me." They took their time, months of dating before becoming physically intimate. And when they finally did take that step, Daniel made sure every single touch was preceded by consent. "Can I kiss you?" Daniel asked, his hand cupping Adrian's face gently. "Yes," Adrian breathed. "Can I touch you here?" Daniel's hand hovering over Adrian's chest. "Yes." "Do you want to keep going, or do you need to stop?" "Keep going. Please keep going." For the first time since Marcus, Adrian experienced intimacy without fear, learned what healthy desire felt like, eager and enthusiastic rather than coerced, discovered that his body could respond to touch that wasn't colored by threat or manipulation. It wasn't perfect. There were moments when memories surfaced, when Adrian had to ask Daniel to stop so he could breathe through a flashback. But Daniel was endlessly patient, holding him through the panic, reminding him that he was safe, that this was different, that he had all the power here. "You're incredible," Daniel told him after the first time they fully made love. Really made love, with complete consent and mutual care. "Do you know how strong you are? How brave?" "I don't feel brave," Adrian admitted, curled against Daniel's chest. "Bravery isn't not being afraid," Daniel said, kissing the top of his head. "It's choosing to do something despite the fear. You reported your assault knowing it would destroy your relationship with your father. You testified knowing it would expose your most vulnerable moments to the world. You've built this incredible life from scratch. That's bravery, Adrian." 1 year into their relationship, Daniel proposed. Not with a grand gesture, but quietly, privately, in Adrian's apartment after a simple dinner. "I know marriage might be complicated for you," Daniel said, "given everything you went through with the forced engagement. But Adrian, I want you to know that you've transformed my life. You've shown me what courage looks like, and I want to spend my life being the partner you deserve. The one who honors your boundaries, celebrates your strength, and loves you without conditions." Adrian cried as he said yes. Not tears of trauma this time, but tears of joy, of knowing he'd found something real, something healthy, something built on mutual respect rather than coercion. They married 2 years later on a beach in California, surrounded by chosen family. Catherine and Emma stood beside them, both couples having traveled the journey from their father's control to authentic freedom together. Adrian's father didn't attend, hadn't spoken to Adrian since that phone call 4 years earlier, and Adrian had made peace with that loss. Some relationships were too toxic to maintain, even family. As Adrian stood facing Daniel, exchanging vows that he'd written himself, he reflected on how far he'd come. "Daniel, you taught me what love without coercion looks like, what it means to be with someone who sees my worth and honors it every single day. You've been patient with my healing, celebrating every breakthrough and supporting me through every setback. I promise to always communicate honestly with you, to prioritize both our needs equally, to build a partnership based on mutual respect, and to never take for granted the gift of being loved by someone who treats consent as sacred. You've shown me that my past trauma doesn't define my future, that I'm capable of healthy love, that I deserve to be cherished. Thank you for choosing me. Thank you for waiting for me to be ready. Thank you for being the kind of man who proves every day that good men exist. I love you. I choose you. I commit to building a life with you that honors both our truths. There wasn't a dry eye in the audience. That night, in their hotel room, Daniel held Adrian close and said, "I'm so proud of you, for surviving, for speaking up, for building this beautiful life, for having the courage to trust again." "Thank you for being trustworthy," Adrian replied, "for showing me what healthy love looks like, for being patient while I learned that not everyone will hurt me the way Marcus did." "You're worth every moment of patience," Daniel said, kissing him softly. "And Adrian, I need you to know something. What happened with Marcus, that wasn't your fault. You didn't cause it, you didn't deserve it. You were victimized by someone who exploited your vulnerability." "I know," Adrian said, and this time, years into his healing journey, he truly believed it. "It took a lot of therapy and a lot of hard work, but I finally understand that I was targeted. Marcus saw someone desperate and trapped, and he used that for his own gratification. The shame belongs to him, not to me." "Exactly," Daniel said. "You were brave enough to escape, to report, to testify, to rebuild. That's what defines you, not what was done to you, but how you chose to respond." Adrian thought about the boy he'd been 5 years ago, watching Marcus from his window, desperate for connection, so vulnerable to manipulation. That boy had been victimized, coerced, systematically assaulted, but that boy had also found the courage to speak up, to fight back, to refuse to let his abuser define him. The phrase Marcus had used, "swallow it or I'll tell your dad," had been designed to humiliate and control, to reduce Adrian to an object whose only value was obedience. But Adrian had refused that reduction, had spoken his truth publicly despite the cost, had transformed his victimization into advocacy that helped countless others. He'd swallowed his fear and spoken anyway, and in doing so, he'd reclaimed every piece of power Marcus had tried to steal. 5 years after the assault, Adrian received a letter from Marcus. It arrived through his lawyer with a note. "You are under no obligation to read this or respond in any way. The choice is entirely yours." Adrian stared at the envelope for a long time, feeling complicated emotions. Finally, with Daniel sitting beside him for support, he opened it. The letter was brief. "Adrian, I know I have no right to contact you. My apologies mean nothing compared to what I did to you. But I'm writing because my therapist says taking full accountability is part of my rehabilitation, even when forgiveness isn't expected or deserved. What I did to you was evil. I targeted you specifically because I saw someone vulnerable and desperate, and I exploited that for my own gratification. I used threats and coercion to assault you repeatedly. I took something that should have been beautiful, your first sexual experiences, and turned them into trauma. There is no excuse, not my own history of abuse, not your attraction to me, not the circumstances. I chose to hurt you, repeatedly and deliberately. That choice defines me as someone who violated the most basic principles of human decency. I don't expect forgiveness, I don't deserve it, but I want you to know that I take full responsibility. What happened was my fault, not yours. You were the victim, I was the predator. I will spend the rest of my life working to become someone better than the monster who hurt you. I hope you found healing. I hope you've built a life filled with love and safety. You deserved that from the beginning. Marcos." Adrian read the letter multiple times, working through complicated emotions, anger at what had been done to him, relief that Marcus wasn't minimizing or making excuses, indifference because Marcus was no longer part of his life. "How do you feel?" Daniel asked quietly. "I don't know," Adrian admitted. "Part of me wants to throw this away and never think about him again. Part of me is glad he's finally taking full responsibility. Part of me doesn't care at all because he's irrelevant to my life now." "All of those responses are valid," Daniel said. "You don't owe him forgiveness. You don't owe him anything." Adrian nodded slowly, then made a decision. "I want to write back. Not for him, for me." to tell him that he didn't break me, that I've survived and thrived despite what he did. And so Adrian wrote, "Marcus, I received your letter. I appreciate you taking full responsibility without minimizing or making excuses. You're right that what you did was evil. You targeted someone vulnerable and exploited that vulnerability through systematic sexual assault. You used my deepest fear as a weapon to coerce me into degrading acts. You stole experiences that should have been beautiful and turned them into trauma. But I want you to know, you didn't destroy me. Yes, you hurt me. Yes, you caused trauma that required years of therapy. Yes, you stole my innocence and my trust. But I survived you. I reported you. I testified against you. I rebuilt my life into something authentic and meaningful. I have a career I love, a husband who treats me with genuine respect, friends who support me, and a community of survivors I help through advocacy work. You tried to reduce me to someone whose only value was compliance to your demands. But I refused that narrative. I spoke up, I fought back, and I built a life that proves your cruelty couldn't define me. So yes, you hurt me, but you didn't break me, and that's the fundamental difference between predators and survivors. You thought causing pain gave you power, but real power comes from healing, growing and thriving despite that pain. I don't forgive you. I don't need to. Forgiveness isn't necessary for my healing. What is necessary is the absolute certainty that what happened wasn't my fault, that I deserved better, and that my life now proves your attempts to break me failed completely. I hope you become someone better than who you were, but that's your work, not mine. Adrian." After sending the letter, Adrian felt the last piece of Marcus's hold on him dissolve. The man who'd assaulted him was now just a name in his past, someone whose cruelty had taught Adrian profound lessons about his own strength, but who no longer had any power over his present or future. He was free, completely, finally free. 10 years after the assault, Adrian stood before an audience of 1,000 survivors at a national conference on sexual trauma and healing. He was now a recognized advocate, the author of a memoir about his experience, and the founder of a nonprofit that provided legal and therapeutic support to survivors of sexual coercion. "I was 23 years old," he began, his voice steady and clear. "Closeted, desperate, vulnerable. Someone saw that vulnerability and weaponized it. For weeks, I was systematically assaulted through blackmail and threats. And for years after, I struggled to understand why I felt responsible for my own victimization." He paused, looking out at the sea of faces, survivors, allies, therapists, advocates, all of them understanding intimately what trauma looked like. "But here's what I've learned through years of therapy, through finding my voice, through helping other survivors. Trauma lies to us. It tells us we caused our abuse, that we deserved it, that we wanted it, that we could have prevented it. The truth is simpler and harder. I was targeted. I was victimized. And what happened to me was not my fault. My abuser gave me an impossible choice: comply with degrading demands, or have my life destroyed. That's not consent. That's coercion. And no amount of physical arousal, no complexity of emotion, no moment of pleasure changes that fundamental fact. The truth is that healing is possible, that speaking up, as terrifying as it is, can lead to justice and freedom. That survivors are some of the strongest, bravest people I know. The truth is that we don't have to let trauma define us. We can integrate it, learn from it, use it to help others, but we don't have to let it be the whole story. I'm Adrian Whitmore. I'm a survivor of sexual coercion and assault, but I'm also an artist, an advocate, an author, a husband, a friend. I'm someone who built a beautiful, authentic life from the ashes of trauma. And if I can do that, if I can go from being that terrified boy who couldn't say no to being someone who helps others find their voices, then you can too. Your trauma doesn't define you. Your courage does. Your choice to heal, to speak up, to refuse to be silenced, that's what matters. To everyone listening, you are not alone. You are believed. You deserve justice and healing and love. And there are people ready to support you if you're brave enough to reach out. Thank you. The standing ovation lasted 10 minutes. Afterward, dozens of survivors approached Adrian, sharing their stories, thanking him for his advocacy, telling him how his willingness to speak publicly had helped them recognize their own abuse and seek help. A young woman, maybe 19, waited until the crowd had thinned before approaching. "Mr. Whitmore, I just wanted to say, your testimony at your trial, reading the transcript, it helped me understand what happened to me. My boyfriend was using the same tactics, threatening to share private photos if I didn't do what he wanted. I thought it was my fault because I'd sent the photos willingly, but your case helped me see it was coercion." "Did you report?" Adrian asked gently. "Yes, he's awaiting trial now, and I'm doing okay. Therapy helps. Having people who believe me helps." She smiled through tears. "Knowing that someone like you survived and thrived, that helps most of all." After she left, Daniel appeared beside Adrian, sliding an arm around his waist. "You were incredible up there, as always." "Just telling my truth," Adrian said. "Your truth has saved lives," Daniel said. "You know that, right? The work you do, the advocacy, the nonprofit, you're giving people hope and resources and the courage to speak up. That's extraordinary." That night, in their hotel room, Adrian reflected on his journey. 10 years ago, he'd been that terrified boy kneeling in a guest house, being given an impossible ultimatum by someone who'd targeted his vulnerability. That moment had felt like it would define him forever. The ultimate humiliation, the ultimate powerlessness. But Adrian had refused to let that moment be his definition. He'd spoken up despite the cost. He'd rebuilt his life despite the obstacles. He'd transformed his trauma into purpose. The title Marcus had tried to give his story, "Swallow It or I'll Tell Your Dad," had been designed to degrade and silence. But Adrian had taken that attempted silencing and turned it into testimony. Had swallowed his fear and spoken anyway. Had proven that survivors could reclaim their power, their voices, their lives. As he drifted to sleep in Daniel's arms, Adrian thought about all the people his story had helped. The survivors who'd recognized their own abuse. The young people who'd learned what coercion looked like. The families who'd learned to support rather than blame. The systems that had changed because survivors spoke up. His assault had been brutal and traumatic and wrong. But his response to it had been powerful and meaningful and right. And that, his courage, his advocacy, his commitment to helping others, that was his legacy. Not what was done to him, but what he chose to do with it.